Okay, deep breath. Okay, guys. Hey, it's Sammy D, and I am hopping on YouTube today to share the most raw, unedited video with some life updates. Now, these life updates, I hope, are inspiring for you. You might not relate to them. You might not understand them at times, but I hope that it still, in some way, inspires you or affirms you or gives you a sense of confidence that you did not have before watching this video. So in advance, let me know in the comments if that is true for you. Number two, if this is a video that you relate to because A, you want to move to New York City, B, you've already moved to New York City, or C, you want to leave New York City. Actually, let's throw in a D, okay? Let's throw in a D. You've already left New York City like me. I moved to New York City in 2008. I was fresh out of college. I left permanently 2 days ago. And so the reason I wanted to hop on here so quickly and just share this diary of why I left New York City is because the feelings and the truth and the honesty it's so present in me. This is going to be an unscripted video. I've thought through some of the things that I want to talk about, but this is really me trying to talk to you like a friend. Because the truth is, we're all on this life journey for ourselves, with our own karma, with our own, how do I say, advantages and disadvantages, with our own desires and values. And especially with desires and values, those things change over time. And so I just share my experience with you, and I want you to take what you need and leave the rest. If there's someone who's tuning into this video and wants to contribute their own story, whether it's leaving New York City or moving to New York City or maybe another major city or just something that has to do with life changes, I would love to hear it, because it's in the comments where we can continue this conversation and where we can just share what's real for us, and hopefully that positively impacts someone else. So guys, astrologically speaking, I'm a Pisces and I might get emotional. Because leaving New York City, it is a big deal. It was, it is, and it will continue to be a big deal. There is such a part of me who developed an identity of self-worth because I lived in New York City. I found myself through my own eyes to be worthy of love, admiration, respect by friends, by peers, by strangers, by other professionals, because I lived in New York City. And first and foremost, it's in recognizing that and how that became such a big reason for me staying. So it's in recognizing that where now I understand that some of my reasons for staying might not have been for my highest and my best. Now, I lived in New York City, or I used to live in New York City. 2 days ago, I left, okay? I no longer live there. I lived in New York City for almost 16 years. So technically, I was in my 16th year, this year, 2023. Let's go back in time. I moved to New York June of 2008. I had graduated from Temple University in Philadelphia 3 weeks before that. Those of you who remember, this was right before the collapse of the financial market, the talk of the recession. Yes, it was in the air, but it hadn't quite happened yet. So for me to land a job in my industry, which was publishing, magazine publishing, was incredible. Incredible. I worked so hard for it. But believe it or not, and this is a YouTube video for another day, I was able to land my first job because of a referral from a friend in my network, which honestly, guys, it's true what they say, build your network and opportunities will come. Now, I had interned in New York the summer of 2006 and the summer of 2007. I lived at NYU Housing at Union Square, 14th Street. So I was already very familiar with the subway, the energy, people, just, that sort of street smart mentality. But I was still very young, 22, my goodness. I think I recently heard that your brain doesn't stop developing until you're about 28. So I was still 6 years pre full development. And moving when I was 22, well, let's just say it was probably one of the most exciting times in my life. I felt like everything was ahead of me. And I also felt a lot of anxiety because everything was ahead of me. Because while I had a job, I still wasn't really sure of myself. I portrayed confidence, but the confidence on the inside was still a work in progress. And today at 37 years old, there are still aspects of my confidence that are a work in progress. So I want to throw that in there because we are always growing and we are always becoming better versions of ourselves for ourselves, within ourselves. Now, looking back at the last 16 years, or almost 16 years, New York City was where I was supposed to be. I have no doubt that staying for as long as I stayed was the right move. There were times when it became very hard. And there were times when it felt like everything good about life was flowing to me because I was in New York City. It's true what they say. There are a lot of opportunities in major cities that are different than maybe smaller cities or perhaps the town or village or neighborhood where you grew up. But it's still all about energy. I believe you can create opportunity wherever you are. But the reason I decided to leave New York City, ultimately, was twofold. And I want to be straight and direct with you guys. I met someone. I'm in an amazing relationship. It is healthy. It is progressive. It is safe. It is a safe relationship. And this man, not being in New York City, showed me another way of life. Because having a long distance relationship, you go to visit that other person and you live their life and you see how things are different and how they feel different. So of course, leaving New York City 2 days ago had a huge reason was because I'm in love and I want to be with this man and we plan on getting married and having children. Now, the second reason, or many reasons, that I wanted to leave New York. And I'm going to say it in a thesis and then we are going to break it down. Is that the cost for the rewards became bigger than I wanted to pay moving forward. Now, why were the costs okay in the past? There's a lot to say to that. But what I will say is that at 37, my values and my priorities and my life perspective changed. At 22, my values and priorities were different than what they are today. And so the last 2 years, and this is pretty much post-pandemic, have been some of my toughest years in New York City. Even though I've been through a lot worse, quote unquote, in terms of just things I had to figure out. The last 2 years were more of an emotional struggle because I started to complain. I started to feel bitter. I started to criticize the city more and more. And for those of you that have lived in New York or have a special place in your heart for New York, You know that New York City is kind of like a person. And so when you start criticizing the person, you have to go, wait, who's the real problem here? Is it them or is it me? And I realized about 6 months ago that the problem was me. That if I wanted to change how I felt, I had to change my environment, my circumstances, and I had to make a choice. And so April of 2023, about 6 months ago, my goodness, I think 7 months ago now, I told my boyfriend, that's it, I'm moving. I'm moving in with you. And here's when. I gave myself, I guess, a timeline, a time limit. It's just what felt good at the moment. It also sort of coincided with being in my past Brooklyn apartment for 2 years. So just felt like a nice little bow, right? To like wrap this present of New York and leave it under the tree and say peace. But within that time limit, or this 7-month window of staying in New York after I decided I wanted to leave, I found more and more clarity as to why I wanted to leave. Now, here on YouTube, there are a ton of videos about moving to New York. There's so much happiness and joy and excitement. And it doesn't matter if you're 22, 32, 42, 82. There is something in that life change of moving to the Big Apple for you. Heck, even if I move back in 6 months, there's something there for me. But I don't want it anymore. I'm good. I've had enough. So here's a few reasons why I decided to leave New York. And I want you to listen in. If you are thinking about moving to New York or thinking about leaving New York, I hope that this just gives you some real insights for you to reflect on. Okay, reason number 1. You're probably thinking, okay, so reason number 1, it's probably about the money, right? Trust me, the money is involved with all of these reasons. But reason number 1 actually isn't money. It's time. It's time. It's this, okay? Or this. I mean, what is time but an illusion? But time is money. Time is freedom. Time is, time to do the things I want to do. Time is rest. Time is health. And in New York City, your time is sucked away. And it's not sucked away necessarily because you've made the wrong choices. You have less control over your time in New York. What I will say is if you have a lot of money, and I'm talking like a lot of money, then you get your time back. You have more time freedom. This could be, instead of taking the subway 45 minutes, you get in an Uber. Instead of doing your laundry yourself, you pay someone else to do it. Instead of cleaning your apartment, you pay someone else to do it. Instead of cooking, you order Seamless every night. You pay money to save time. But for those of us who are quote unquote middle class or creative entrepreneurs such as myself, and this is a video for a whole other day, maybe later this week, but I've been self-employed since 2009. We don't have the liberty of just paying to get our time back. And so with that comes the constant mental examination of how am I going to prioritize my time? How am I going to set up my day so that I can squeeze the most juice out of this day, right? I can be as productive as possible. A equals B equals C equals D. Point A to point B, point 1 to point 2. I don't know, maybe, hey, how can I do point 1 to point 5 all in one fell swoop? I mean, it's like you're constantly in your head. I remember, because I'm a full-time reseller, so part of me trying to squeeze the most time out of my day would be like, well, I have to go to the post office, but I have a ton of packages. I can't get them all there in one round, but maybe I'll take an Uber for $10. And then on the way back, I'll go to the grocery store. So I'll make sure that I have my bag. And then after the grocery store, I actually have to pick up the dry cleaning. So I'll make sure that I have another bag for the dry cleaning. And then when I get back to the apartment, I'll get my mail. And then I have to meet this person, at, 45th Street. So what time is the subway coming so I can make sure that I don't miss a train? It's a lot. It's a lot. And I might say this a few times in this video, but the more that you're in your head about planning, about efficiency, about productivity, the less you can be present. And so maybe some of you have noticed, even in my energy, I'm a very fast talker. I'm a very fast mover. Perhaps I was like that before I moved to New York City, but I argue that I had to become even more so by moving to New York City. Relaxation and a relaxed energy for Sammy D is few and far between. I mean, those moments are few and far between. And so my default is speed and efficiency and productivity. Okay, positives to that, of course. But again, the negatives are that sometimes when I'm speaking to someone in New York City, I'm thinking to myself where I have to be next. I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I should probably get the train at 5:15 so I can be home by 6:15 so that I can cook because I have a call at 8 and I want to relax. It's just so much. It's instead of being focused in the moment of having a nice conversation with a friend or just flowing, I'm not flowing. Constantly thinking of what's next. Now, some of you who are familiar with masculine and feminine energies know that to be feminine is to be flowy, right? To be masculine is focused. And this conversation around time and utilizing time to its maximum in New York City really put me in my masculine. And I noticed that when I would come to visit my boyfriend, when I was out of that environment, when we had a car to run errands, when I didn't have so much to do, I was more in my feminine. And whether you agree with this or not, I do believe that, women who associate with the gender of being a woman enjoy being in their feminine. I don't want to be in my masculine all the time. I like that I have that available to me, but I also want to have an opportunity to turn it off. But in New York City, I think I only turned it off when I slept. And so some words of wisdom for anyone who is moving to New York City. Really understands that even if you move to Manhattan, unless you live right next to your job, there's going to be a lot of time losses. If you become active in the nightlife scene, you're going to have a time loss because the trains are slower at night. So maybe you have to get an Uber. If you don't have laundry in your building, which unless you have a nice new building, you most likely don't, you're going to have a time loss doing your laundry every single weekend or every other weekend. The time losses can be micro, but they really add up. A quick example is that for me, as a reseller, one of my post offices don't accept more than 3 packages to be scanned at a time. I like to scan my packages because I want to know, these are going to safely get to my customers. So I take the train 15 minutes to a better post office that will scan my packages. That's a 30-minute loss versus the 10-minute walk that it would have been to the post office. Actually, probably more than 30 minutes sometimes, because sometimes you're waiting for the train for 10 minutes. You get down to the station and you have to wait for 10 minutes. So, my goodness, I have so much more to say about time. I think that the phrase in a New York minute is absolutely true, but there also should be a phrase, you know, how do I say this? Not New York minute. New York time loss, maybe? New York negative 10 minutes, New York negative 30 minutes, right? Because you're just always going against time. So even if you plan your day perfectly, you're not going to have the perfect day because there are these variables that are out of your control. And so over the last 6 months of recognizing that I couldn't reclaim my time unless I really, really, really started to make a lot more money, which would involve really, honestly, getting a corporate job, I just decided that I wanted to reclaim my time. And so here I am in a whole new city. I'm actually getting a car in 2 weeks. And I have opportunities to reclaim my time. And I'm so excited. Okay, so reason number 2, I left New York City. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about, yes, okay. You guys get it. Currently we live in a world where money is our exchange of resources, energy, goods, services, and we are living in an era, have been living in an era, but more so now, where we're really beginning to notice, okay, that used to cost this much, but now it costs this much. Or a bottle of water should cost $1, but I can't seem to find it for less than $3 in most places. Or, I'd love to have a glass of wine, but it seems like everywhere I go with my friends, a glass of wine is $18. Now, I want to back up a second because what I have come to find about prices in New York City is that they run the spectrum. Most of the desirable places cost a lot of money, but there are still many opportunities to shop groceries for less, to have a really nice meal at a hole-in-the-wall restaurant for a good amount of money, to get a coffee for $2 at your local bodega. These are possibilities. But if you are on the go, following what your friends want to do, going somewhere hot, hip, desirable, chances are you're dropping some dough. I knew that the cost of New York had really started to go up when I noticed how much a latte began to cost. And this is so basic. This is so basic, guys, but I'm a coffee drinker. Okay, so I want to say it was 2019. And I remember being like, why is this latte $6? Like, they used to be $4. Like, there was a time between 2008 and 2018 about when it was like a $4 latte was the average price. And I'm not talking about Starbucks necessarily. I'm talking more about like, just all these different chain coffee stores that are in New York City. But nope, $6. Now, if you want an oat milk latte that's a reasonable size, it's probably $7.75. I was speaking to a friend the other day who said, I ordered lattes or some sort of iced drink for me and my boyfriend, and it came out to be $16 with the tax. I'm like, 2 drinks for $16? So that is one little example of the micro shifts in costs. For those of us that buy the same things over and over, we can tell the increase in costs. We can also tell when something's truly on sale, when something's truly affordable. And we learn over time. You know what? Maybe I need to really go to Trader Joe's on West 23rd Street because it's cheap, right? But when you live in New York City and you live in an affordable neighborhood of Brooklyn, there's not necessarily a Trader Joe's, which is one of the cheapest grocery stores in this country. So you have to schlep or make it a part of your time schedule. Remember, guys, how efficient can I be? So maybe I'm in the city running a secondhand shopping tour, which that was one of my many businesses. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bring a bag. I'm going to bring a big bag here. I'm going to bring a big bag with me and go shopping after the tour so that then I can schlep home for 40 minutes with my Trader Joe's groceries, but I've saved like 50, 60 bucks. And that is just the way you would have to think. Over time, you would find how these, basic everyday necessities, you would find where to buy them for less. But you would sacrifice time sometimes to get them for less. Now, something I didn't have to sacrifice as much was my coffee. I lived near a great bodega, but what New Yorker doesn't live near a great bodega? To have good, just drip coffee for $2. But other things like groceries, laundry, I'm trying to think what else, even, common household supplies like paper towels, toilet paper, how do I say, dishwashing liquid. I mean, just like these basic things. You'd be like, why is the toilet paper $12 for 6 rolls? That seems like a lot of money. So you would find the value store, maybe like 10 blocks away from you, and walk there and walk back so that your toilet paper was like $5 or $6 for 6 rolls. And 10 blocks is half a mile. So that adds up, there and back to be about a mile walking. My steps in New York, unbelievable, which leads me to my third point, but I'm not quite there yet. So with money in New York City, of course, we always hear rent. We hear about energy. We hear about public transit. We hear about the cost of food. It adds up. To have a life in New York where you're not constantly trying to save a buck, you just have to spend some money. So as a quick example, if that subway ride is going to take an hour and 20 minutes because you live in an outer borough, you need to be somewhere, or you have like a really heavy suitcase. I would oftentimes have really heavy suitcases because I would be transporting clothes. I would sometimes just have to take an Uber. An Uber from Brooklyn to Manhattan is usually minimum $60. To do a flea market in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, anywhere, right? Where I can't physically take everything on the train to set up at a flea market. I have to take an Uber or rent a U-Haul or something. That is more money that I have to put into having a business in New York. So maybe I make $600, but the flea market booth itself is $120, and then I spent another $80, $100 for transport. That is eating into my profits. Whew, I'm getting upset. I'm getting frustrated just talking about it. And so again, the point I'm trying to make is that yes, you can be frugal. You can be mindful in New York, but it costs you so much time. I could have made my meals every day, but then I didn't have time. I just didn't have time. Or I could meal prep. I mean, that's something like I've experimented with over time, but with the ride on the subway and walking and just being so physical in New York, sometimes you come home at 7, you're just exhausted. You're exhausted. And so I found myself also just trying to eat something that I could make at home, but it oftentimes wasn't the healthiest. And that's another conversation for another day. But I think you guys get the point that in order to have some sort of balance in New York, you have to spend money. You have to spend more money in different ways than you would perhaps living in the suburbs. Perhaps living somewhere where you could drive and, for example, it's easy for you to drive to Target. It's easy for you to drive to Costco to save all that money versus us in New York City. I have to take the train to Target. I have to take the train to Costco. And then what? I'm going to carry all this stuff so I can only get so much at a time. Or I have to get an Uber and then it costs $40 for the Uber. So there goes my savings. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting frustrated. I'm so glad I'm out of the city. Okay. So reason number three, all right? Do you guys like how my nails match my shirt? Also, I didn't film this quite well, but this is my New York shirt. I thrifted it. All right. So reason number 3, New York City is exhausting. And we're not talking just mental and emotional exhaustion, but physical exhaustion. Now I'm going to take a screenshot. I'm going to add it here of my average steps. Now, some days I was actually I was actually running because I am a runner. But the average day of just being out and about and doing what I have to do is a minimum of 10,000 steps. And I think that's very healthy in some ways, but you also have to understand that, back to what I was just saying previously, is that you're oftentimes schlepping. I would wear a backpack oftentimes, and I remember it would get so heavy. My back would start to hurt and I would put it down, and it was heavy because I'd have my laptop and maybe a water bottle because I didn't want to buy water because water costs so much. And I would have a water bottle so I could try to fill it somewhere, but there aren't a lot of public fountains. So sometimes I would just fill it in the faucet of a bathroom. Please don't judge me. It's just, these are the things that you have to do to save money. But anyway, it would be so heavy and I'd be running a secondhand shopping tour and I'd just have to put it down just to rest my back. And then, the subways are not handicap accessible. They're on their way to making them, I think 65% handicap accessible by 2028. Let me double check that. But sometimes even the elevators at the handicap accessible elevators weren't working, or the escalators weren't working. So you're walking a lot of stairs. When I say New York City is a gym, I am not joking. If you visit New York City, I dare you to find someone who seems to be unhealthy in terms of their weight. Okay. Of course, yes. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that could say I could stand to lose a few pounds, but not unhealthy where you can't move. Okay. You have to be able to move in New York City. And so if you move to New York City, speaking of moving, and you want to get in better shape, the city will naturally get you in better shape. I promise you. So yes, the positive is that I had high stamina, but the negative is that I'm pushing and pushing and pushing. And sometimes, again, just so tired that it's hard for me to be there for myself. It's hard for me to be there for others. It's hard for me to just enjoy the time, because I feel like a pack mule and I'm just all the time, through the crowds, up the stairs, down the stairs, on the subway, off the subway, pushing a suitcase, carrying a bag, carrying a backpack. And for what? So I can be more efficient, because you cannot take the train, right? So let me just back up. I did live in Manhattan for 12 years. I lived in East Harlem. So I was about arguably a 25-minute ride to pretty much anywhere, but still that's 25 minutes there and 25 minutes back. So I'm not going to go run an errand and then be oh, I got to loop back to the house and get something. No, that's a 50-minute time waster. 50 minutes. Versus I would say here in Baltimore where I've moved, well, okay, I guess it can be a time waster. You still have to be efficient, but you have a car to keep everything in. Okay. As a person, I can only carry so much, right? So I would oftentimes just be carrying everything I possibly could. Oh my God. I look back and I know it's only been 48 hours, but I'm absolutely insanity. The things that I would do just to get things done. it actually almost makes me emotional because I'm just like, I feel sorry for this person. Ooh, told you guys I'm a Pisces. Okay, I'm gonna get emotional. So the physical stress, I've always been a sleeper, but over the years I've noticed that when I leave New York, I usually crash immediately. I think that being out of the adrenaline of that city, my body naturally goes, okay, I can rest, I can recharge, I can rejuvenate. And instead of sleeping an average of 8 hours, I'll sleep 10 for like a few nights in a row. But being in the city, yes, I would oftentimes catch up on sleep, but there's also this, sometimes you're just like, I got stuff to do today. So your body wakes you up, or you hear a police car or a fire truck or a school bus outside. I actually started to have to sleep with waves, like crashing waves, so that I wouldn't hear anything outside, so that if I needed to sleep in, I actually could. So while I've always been a fit person, I noticed over the last 2 years, having hit 35, that my physical stamina wasn't quite what it used to be to endure the city. Maybe I was doing more. That could have been part of it, because I really jumped back into resale these last 2 years. So I was moving a lot of suitcases around. That's always been my joke, that I just schlepped suitcases. But I just noticed that maybe it's more like my bounce back wasn't as strong. And so recognizing that maybe physically I have another 10 years left, 9 years left of just being really at my maximum physical potential, really started to scare me about staying in New York. A lot of people leave New York because once they have kids, everything changes, because just getting a stroller up and down the subway stairs is unbelievably challenging. The moms I see, every time I see a woman or a man, okay, anyone, a person moving something up and down the stairs, particularly a child in a stroller, but I try to help because, oh my gosh, the amount of stress on your body, as well as maybe the amount of stress of like, what if I drop this child, or this child is, in this stroller, maybe scared because I'm trying to get it up the stairs. It's crazy. And again, this goes back to the fact that not all subway stations are handicap accessible. I don't know what percentage they are right now, but it's very small. So being a mother, or really anyone who has to move something around, is very difficult unless you have a car, or you have the money to pay for Ubers, which once you have a kid, okay, your budget becomes stretched. So do you really have more money to just take an Uber everywhere? Not so much. So that's why when people have families in New York, a lot of times they leave within like the first 1 or 2 years. I think sometimes they think that they can do it, and then they realize that the grass is greener on the other side, AKA Jersey, AKA Long Island, or me here in Maryland. So, and it's interesting because I think looking back at my own perception of living in New York City when I first moved here, I never thought that there would be like a physical issue with being here. And that's because when I moved here, when I was 22, I was looking to have a corporate career. I wasn't looking to be a reseller schlepping suitcases. But life changes your direction, and life changes the things you have to do. And so I made it happen these last 2 years. But again, as I noticed that I was not in a good place mentally about it, I realized that I was pointing the finger at New York City when I needed to be pointing the finger at me. Okay, I can be a reseller anywhere. It doesn't have to be New York. I can be a reseller who doesn't have to, make physical sacrifices. I can be a reseller who goes back to New York on her own terms, because let's just be real here. inventory in New York City is top notch. So physical stamina, physical stress, this is something to think about, to anticipate. It's going to look different for everyone, but you cannot get around the subway stairs, the pressure of being on the subway, of walking thousands of steps every day, of having to walk just to do your errands. The pros is that, yes, it does help with your overall health. The cons is that if you're doing some extremely physically taxing things day in and day out, it's going to start to wear away at you. Okay, reason number 4 that I wanted to leave New York. This is going to sound, I'm judging myself. Because I like to think of myself as someone with deep empathy and deep consideration for others. And maybe, again, this is just an age thing. But reason number 4 that I decided to leave New York, or wanted to leave New York, is I'm really tired of seeing people struggle on the streets. Okay, so what does that mean? Pre-pandemic, pre-2020, I didn't see it as much. I don't know if we had less of a drug problem in New York, or perhaps there's just been some law changes. I am not an expert, but the amount of homelessness and, drug issues that I witnessed pre-pandemic was significantly less than what I noticed post-pandemic. So here's a quick example. I used to live in Manhattan. I lived in East Harlem. East Harlem was not a great place at all, probably until 2008 when I moved. Even then, it was, it was this. So I was able to be okay with it because, again, my values and priorities were different when I was 22. Safety was not the highest of priorities. I think that's because when you're 22, you think you're invincible. Now, over the years, that neighborhood became much safer, much more livable. There was a great shopping center that opened up down the street. We had some coffee shops, some businesses, a beautiful new grocery store around the corner from my apartment. It was actually a little bit easier to live in Manhattan than where I was in Brooklyn for the last 2 years. However, right before the pandemic, I met someone. I met my ex-boyfriend, and we decided to sort of like shack up together during the pandemic, not thinking that the pandemic would be forever, or as long as it was. And so instead of letting go my Manhattan apartment, I just subletted it. And there were people that actually needed it during the pandemic. I also subletted it to a COVID travel nurse, which was wonderful. And I'm so glad that I was able to do that. But when this ex-boyfriend and I ended our relationship July of 2021, I didn't want to go back to this apartment. The most important reason is because the neighborhood started to be really iffy. I really dangerous. You know what? I'm going to say it. It became dangerous. And here's why. All of a sudden, on my block, right before the subway, it seemed that a lot of people from a shelter that wasn't too far started to hang out there. And that's what the word on the street was. So, again, I'm just the messenger. This is what I heard, what I noticed. And the shelters in New York City, if you don't get back to the shelter by like 10:30, you can't enter. So usually, and this is at night, usually they would leave, right, at night, which is good. But still, in the dark hours leading up to the night, and even during the day, it's just groups of mostly men drinking, smoking, hanging out made me feel uncomfortable. I could feel them stare me down. I could feel them check me out. And this had never, ever happened before to me in New York City. When I say never, I mean 16 years. Still, it never happened after this moment. But it must have been July of 2021. And yeah, I had broken up with my boyfriend, or we had broken up. And I was checking on the apartment, or maybe in the process of moving out. I forget. So I get off the subway, minding my own business, and someone walks up behind me on the subway platform who seems to be from the shelter. And this is what I noticed later. But he walks up behind me and goes, "Ah!" Scared, right? Okay, I'm scared just remembering it. I was like, oh my God. And then he laughed and kept walking. And okay, that's not the worst thing, okay? It's like what? Like a prank, I guess. It's a prank. But that never having happened to me before made me realize that I was noticeable and that I was more vulnerable living there. And so that really sealed the deal for me, that it was time to leave that neighborhood. Now that's just one example. If you guys go to Midtown Manhattan today, all right, today is November 3rd, you're going to see a lot of people on the street, people sleeping against the walls, sleeping overnight. For the first time ever last year, I noticed previously used drug needles in the subway. There's a lot more trash than there used to be. Certain areas of Midtown Manhattan, you have people asking for money left and right, left and right, left and right. And in order to protect myself, I have to go like this. And I can't pay attention to them. But sometimes, people, they haven't showered or they're missing shoes. I mean, you can't ignore it from an empathetic, like, human place, right? But there's nothing I can do. If I give money, I don't know where it's going. So not just that, but a lot of people asking for money on the subway. Some of the same people too, like you would begin to notice the same people, and then there would be people, or have been people. I mean, this is like probably this is just like scam number one of how to get money, but people would pretend to be injured. So they have a wheelchair, and then you'd see them get out of the wheelchair and walk like at the next subway stop, and you'd be like, oh my God, they were pretending to be injured. Part of me doesn't blame them. I mean, I get it. Like, I get the strategy, but I'm laughing now, but like seeing it day in and day out, it does begin to hurt. And the reason I judge myself is because it's like, well, you're not the one who's hurting. You're not the one who is homeless. You're not the one who has a drug addiction. You can't, avoid seeing the real things of life, right? But it just starts to get to you. And it's almost like, if you don't want to watch horror movies because they kind of like trigger you, you don't have to watch horror movies. And so, long story short, I felt like New York began to be a movie that I didn't want to watch, but I had to watch. There was no way around it. It was just constantly being filmed around me. And there was a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of moments of just feeling, I'll also add that for the first time ever in Brooklyn, and I'm actually going to add footage here so that you guys can see, there was a abandoned vehicle across the street from where I lived that two people started to live out of. And it took 5 months, maybe a little bit less, for the city to actually tow that vehicle away. I think they had to go through a process where we had to call 311, meaning us as like neighbors. There had to be like a reasonable reason for them to have that vehicle towed. Because I think that there's a law in New York, and I'm just saying this, I'm not sure, that like if it's their home, you can't necessarily tow it away. Because it's someone's home, even though it's like that could have been a stolen vehicle. I mean, the plates were Pennsylvania, for goodness sakes. I remember this. So it was like this van. And at first I was like, okay, all right, they're living out of the car. Okay, whatever. And it ended up being fine in the end. I never felt threatened. I never felt like this is going to be a problem for me, except a few things. I live next to a school. So to have two people that are using drugs, they were definitely using, living out of a vehicle, okay. Not that these kids aren't seeing all the things of New York, but you never know what's going to happen. Two, they started lighting candles in the car. If that car catches on fire, all that smoke was going to blow into my apartment. Okay, first world problems, yes. But my goodness, I mean, that car fire could have spread, potentially. Three, there was one night where I woke up around 5 a.m. and I heard one of the individuals screaming, and he seemed to be punching the air. So I think he had been using or something and was just going through some sort of process of being high or coming down off the drugs, and witnessing that, because it was 5 a.m, it's dark, I'm looking out my window. It was again, it was disturbing. It was a horror movie that I didn't want to watch. I didn't sign up to watch that horror movie. So, wow. I mean, there's going to be a lot of feedback, I think, to this part, because you guys hear a lot about the dangers of New York. What I will say is that New York is so big that, statistically speaking, I think it's a safer place to be than, say, Chicago or where I moved, Baltimore. But yes, there is a lot. There is a lot that you see day in and day out that is disturbing, and you have to block out, because if you become concerned about it, it can become all-consuming. But the truth is, you can't do anything. So back to these people living out of the car, all I could do is protect myself if that became necessary, call 311, which is kind of like the hotline for New York City, and pray about it. And eventually, car was towed. They were off our block. So our block, it felt safer. It felt safer for me to walk on that side of the street. I actually stopped walking on that side of the street. But that didn't mean that there wasn't going to be another situation, around the corner or in the subway, maybe someone constantly sleeping in the subway. So I never really knew what was going to happen next. And that is just something that when you move to New York City, you have to be okay with. You do have to learn street smarts. You do have to learn to not be so concerned. And as a deeply empathetic person, that was hard for me. It's still hard for me, because I actually have judgment over myself. Well, I should care more. I should try to help. I should volunteer. I should. But the truth is, I had, back to everything I've just shared with you guys. Wow. I think my throat is catching, because I know that I shouldn't. There's a part of me that I'm putting all this guilt on myself. But the truth is, I had so much to do. It wasn't like I had all this extra time to be a superhero to people that needed help in New York City. I had to help myself, right? So my hope is that while I'm here in Baltimore, that I can focus on more initiatives that do help people, because I do believe in helping people. It is absolutely one of my values. And I want to be more committed to doing what I can with what I have while still staying safe. Okay, guys, so those were 5 reasons, just 5, why I chose to leave New York. There's so many more. I mean, there's all these micro reasons, stories on stories on stories that I could tell you. This is part 1 of my Leaving New York City series. My goal from a place of service, and honestly, maybe even self-fulfillment, is to create a diary, looking back, reflecting, sharing what I learned, so that anyone who is looking to move to New York City or is in New York City and is maybe feeling a little insecure or wants to leave New York City, I just hope that my truth offers you something. I don't know what that is. I am not trying to push an agenda. I am not trying to say that New York City is the worst city on the planet and not to move there. I would never change my decision. My decision to live in New York City for 16 years was perfect for me, but it was also perfect for me to leave when I left. And so again, I hope that the value that you take from this is something that you can apply to yourself and your set of circumstances. And most importantly, you trust yourself. You trust yourself, you have the insights and the hindsight and the foresight to make the best decisions. So thank you guys. Let me know in the comments what resonated with you. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys for part 2 very soon. Peace.